Next, we have the Jerry Flint Fellowship for International Business Reporting to Sandal Hamagama from Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, presented by Jerry's wife, Kate McLeod. Sandali has an expertise in international waste trade and waste management, especially as it's a crisis that so many South Asian countries, including her own Sri Lanka, are facing. Sandali has an OPC Foundation fellowship with Reuters that will take her to Mumbai. First, we will hear from Kate.
Just a little note about Jerry. At the New York Times in the 1970s, Jerry was in charge of the Stringers, and he made an effort to hire women, several of whom went on to careers at major news organizations. Then he went to Forbes. As an assistant managing editor, he was hiring reporters. He hired the first African-American reporter at Forbes magazine, also a woman. So I am pleased to present the 10th Jerry Flint Scholarship to the 7th woman to win it, Sandali.
It's actually really nice to be here today. Watching the stock markets this past week has been anxiety-inducing, so this is a good break. I grew up in Sri Lanka during its decades-long conflict with the Tamil Tigers, and when the war finally came to an end in 2009, my country tried really hard to catch up to its neighbors. Population and consumption went up, but everyone politely ignored the growing stench of a terrifying problem. In 2017, a section of a large municipal garbage dump in our commercial capital collapsed and buried 145 houses in its neighboring community. Landfills popped up in strange places like national parks, forests, and reserves. Photos emerged of wild animals grazing at garbage dumps filled with plastic bags, and elephants started showing up dead with plastic in their stomachs. Without having made any substantial progress at managing our own waste, local companies then started importing waste from other countries. And last year, Sri Lanka joined a host of Southeast Asian nations that decided to fight back and return shipments of waste coming in from the developed world. I began reporting on my country's waste management crisis thinking it was an environmental story, but I quickly learned that waste is an internationally traded commodity that very few pay attention to, and I had found a business story in the last place I thought to look. The most important global stories of my time are going to be influenced by environmental issues and climate change, and businesses will have to factor in limited resources, pollution, mass migration, and reinvent their products and processes. So I'm studying business and data journalism so that I have the right tools to tell these stories of a changing world. I want to continue working on what I feel to be underreported stories like international waste trade, and I'm very thrilled to be going to Mumbai with Reuters later this year. Thank you.
I grew up in a city in the south of India that is known for its silk textiles and rich coffee. It's also known to have faced a devastating tsunami and several floods in the past. As I grew up there, I found myself wondering, what was the impact of those events and how far did it reach? Those are questions I continue to ask myself now, on my journey of becoming a foreign correspondent. In early 2020, I worked at CNBC's Asia Pacific headquarters in Singapore. I was at the newsroom when Brexit was formalized and when a suspected case of flu blew up into a global pandemic. I didn't realize then that some of those events could dictate how businesses and economies would shape up for years to come. What I did observe, however, was the profound human impact of some of those events, no matter which part of the world they originated from. Journalism is my way of finding answers for the tough questions that not only need answering for the corporate world, but also for the average person next door. For the Overseas Press Club Award, I wrote about India's vast diamond industry that is so deeply entrenched in tradition and legacy. Diamonds are seen as the purest form of wealth in Indian families, and more recently, this industry has been disrupted by lab-grown diamonds. This story covers the cusp of demographic, social, and economic trends that India is facing as we speak. I hope that with this scholarship, I can explore business and economic stories from a human perspective. My goal is to cover Asian economies, which are often not seen as the center of momentum in business reporting. Thank you so much for this honor, and I hope to make the most of this opportunity.
Valerie, tell us the quick trajectory, the quick story of how you went from being an OPC Foundation winner to being a war correspondent for the New York Times, covering the planet's biggest story.
Wow. Well, I graduated from Columbia in 2013 and was lucky enough to become an OPC fellow, a fellowship to go and work in the Balkans, actually with Reuters in their Belgrade bureau. And after my time at Reuters finished, I actually continued to work in the Balkans. I spent 4 years then in Kosovo. And then I continued to cover the region for the Financial Times. I was based out of Budapest, but I was covering Hungary, Romania, Albania, Bulgaria, and the whole former Yugoslavia, where I had previously lived also before my time at Columbia. And yeah, it was a great experience to be an OPC fellow, to have the support of the network that I still have, and of the donor that I still have. And I think that extra time that I spent in the Balkans as part of that fellowship was very helpful for me, just to boost my regional knowledge, to be able to do something that I wouldn't have been able to do, as a young reporter without without my own trust fund, I guess. So that helped me quite a lot. And then I started for the New York Times in May of last year and finally moved to Moscow only in August, actually, not expecting to become or wanting to become a war correspondent. But, already just a few months later, sort of the war drums began beating. And I remember we sat around a table in our bureau where the New York Times has operated for more than 100 years, actually, and discussed, things are starting to look really bad. The troop buildup looks really bad. And we tried on our flak jackets, thinking that, hoping that we wouldn't need to be using them. But then, things started getting even worse. And on Valentine's Day, I was on a flight with that same flak jacket to Kyiv, where I spent, where I was for the beginning of the war, which we all sort of realized the night before it happened was going to happen. And then I've spent, How did you
know that was going to happen?
Well, it's interesting. I actually, in Kyiv, people did not expect it to happen. Even the day before, they were denying that this could ever happen. But I remembered, the first place I ever worked as a journalist was Sarajevo. And all of my friends from Bosnia would say, even as we watched the war beginning in Croatia, even as we saw nationalism growing ever more rampant in Serbia, and, saw alarming signs here, nobody believed it could happen until it did. And that was always in the back of my mind, actually, while I was in Kyiv, even as I was also hoping against hope that it was just hype. But, the Putin speech, the Security Council meeting, the cyber attacks that all now seem actually like distant memories that were only about a month and a half ago. And then in the end, the night before it happened, there was some intelligence going around that it would happen in the middle of the night, or before dawn broke. And, I gathered some of my friends who hadn't heard that and sort of told them we all packed a little bag for ourselves, to, all the essential items that we might need in case we lost communications, in case we couldn't find food, something like that. In the end, thankfully, the strike on Kyiv was quite drastic, but we were all safe and fine at that point.
What was the moment of greatest danger did you feel altogether you were in Ukraine for a month, 6 weeks?
I think 6 or 7 weeks, and I'm going back. Actually, for me, the biggest danger was actually right before the war, right before the all-out escalation began. So I had actually gone on the 19th of February to the front line in the east. I mean, most people really expected that if something were to really big were to happen, it would be happening in the East. So, many of my colleagues had gone out there to base, and I embedded for a day with the Ukrainian military and with some politicians to go to the East, because before the attacks in Kiev and Kharkiv and other cities began, there was sort of 2-3 days of like very intense, sustained, heavy shelling along the line of contact, which, had been relatively, before that, kind of smoldering. There might be an exchange of fire here and there, but it sort of began, exactly as American intelligence was saying it would, possibly with an eye to provoking a false flag attack, or, provoking the Ukrainians into responding. And I went to the town of Svitlodarsk, which is home to a very important chemical processing facility and energy plant. And David Arahamia, who is the faction leader in the Ukraine's parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, from Zelensky's party, organized just maybe a handful of journalists to go to a site. This was, 2-3 in the afternoon. And we organized to go to a site that had been shelled at 11 a.m. that day. And we went there. It was just kind of a small military outpost, probably one of the closest to the other side, which was Khorlovka, where like Russian troops were stationed there, and we sort of spent about 5-10 minutes interviewing the local station commander, talking to him about the casualties that were sustained. One of the men who was hit needed to have his arm amputated. My photographer colleague Lindsay Adario showed up, and then all of a sudden we just got this time to go, we need to get out of here. And I think pretty much just as we had packed into the car and pulled out, 3-4 seconds later, we could hear them lobbing mortars at us. They were very close to us. So that was the first real brush that I had in this war, and I think the closest that I've come really to being in harm's way. And we were being driven by a soldier in the Ukrainian army who drove very well. He had spent 8 years actually on this part of the front and knew the road the very potholed road very well. And he kind of just kept saying, everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. Don't freak out. We're getting out of here. He was so calm. Yeah. And then we pulled into a kind of, I don't know, an outpost, maybe 1-2 kilometers away. And we waited for the shelling to stop, and then we left. We went.
Sorry, Bill.
Oh no, I was just going to say that we went by bus to Kramatorsk, which is the city that today was shelled. The train station was shelled, killing, at least 20-30 people who were trying to flee the city because the Ukrainian government ordered mass evacuation. Since now that the initial phase of Russia's operation failed to take Kiev and some of these other cities, they seem to be regrouping towards the east, and yeah.
You wrote a piece about Mariupol. It was very graphic. While you were in Lviv, I think you were in the West. Are you able to do a lot of reporting on social media, or is it on telephone, or how are you able to get such graphic and compelling detail from a distance?
Thank you. Yes. Unfortunately, it was really impossible to get into Mariupol, and it was very hard to find out what was going on because even, the city government, many of those officials are not inside the city, and they're getting information, from second and third hand sources. What I tried to do was find as many people as possible who had recently left, with incredibly graphic, incredibly fresh, incredibly painful memories. And I was speaking to them by video chat, by phone call, on Telegram, and I would speak to them, I would say probably for an hour and a half each person. And I think for them, everything was so fresh and had just happened, and they hadn't spoken to anybody besides the people around them about it. And, these words and images sort of tumbled out of them. Wow. And I was very glad that they were able and willing to share their story with me. And many of the people that I spoke to said that this is very hard and very painful, but the world needs to know, because when you're sitting there in the basement, when you are huddled alone with no electricity, no contact with the outside world, you feel like you're abandoned, that nobody knows that you're there, that it's almost as if you don't exist. And so it was very important to me to be able to put their stories on the front page of the New York Times and to tell them that we do very much care and we do know you exist and we want you to live and thrive.
Wow, how powerful. John?
That kind of reporting does bring change eventually. My only question is, are you taking care of yourself and are your colleagues taking care of themselves?
Well, I feel very, very blessed to, be a full-time staffer at the New York Times and have my editors and people around us actually really caring and inquiring every day and having a very supportive community. Wars are often covered by a lot of freelancers. And, when I was encouraged to take a break, other friends and colleagues of mine sort of said, well, that's nice for you. Like, I'm a freelancer. I can't do that. Just even logistically getting in and out of the country takes time and money. And so from that, the paper has been very supportive in terms of, the editors calling to check in, especially after I had this incident with a mortar fire at the beginning before the full-scale invasion started. Yes, I feel very blessed that the editors are checking in all the time and very genuinely concerned. And we have so many foreign correspondents in our network that can come in as well and replace colleagues who take a break or who leave, and then sort of get some rest and come back, because it was really it's difficult to. You're working nonstop. There's so much more to cover than you can even cover in a day in a region. So I'm very grateful that they encouraged me to have a small break.
Wonderful, Valerie. Thank you so much. I'm personally very touched that you were willing to do this and be so articulate and so convincing.
Thank you.
Now, Valerie was speaking from Cyprus, where she was on R&R. This segment was edited down from a longer version, which will now be posted to the OPC YouTube channel. The link is in the chat there. You see it right now. We've also been in touch with Juan Arredondo, who won the Harper Scholarship at the OPC Foundation Luncheon in 2020. As most of you know, he was shot in Kyiv while documenting the flight of refugees for Time magazine. He survived, but his friend and colleague did not. Juan is back in the United States recovering from his wounds, and we reached out to him. In his great humility, he thanked us for what we had done and asked to send his best wishes to this year's winners. Lastly, my personal thanks to everyone involved in supporting our foundation. Our board is remarkably strong and passionate about this cause. Most governors took part in judging, and 4 of them provided media training to help our winners prepare for today. Jane Riley and Kat Riley have held our program together with great conviction and indeed courage. Chad Bouchard has been our behind-the-scenes technological guru as usual. We'll be having a physical in-person reception on May 19th in Manhattan for our friends and for past and present winners. Let Jane and Kat know if you wish to attend, if you haven't already signed up. So we hope to return to an in-person luncheon at the Yale Club in February 2023. Wouldn't that be lovely? We've already booked it. Thanks to the efforts of so many people, the OPC Foundation is alive and well. I regard it as something of a miracle. Goodbye for now.